by the end of the day, we need to look at what is already priced in. Uh, I've been very vocal 3-4 months back that Europe was stuck in a big mess, that we needed to price electricity prices at higher levels, and that natural gas prices were also too low as a consequence of the ongoing mess with Russia. But by now, we cannot be negatively surprised on the supply side. And I mean, given what's already priced in, I struggle to see the negative news coming out anytime soon as a consequence of Russia playing in its entire hand already. If you look at the consensus in the US, first of all, it seems as if most people expect the European economy to run out of energy before the end of this heating season, by the end of March next year. I don't find that to be the base case, so I disagree with that consensus in the United States. If we look at the European consensus, at least if you look a few weeks back, it felt as if most politicians, they expected this to be a non-issue, basically, and they didn't really take any notice of the bizarre developments in the natural gas and electricity markets. But I think the tide has turned a bit in the European debate over the past couple of days, actually. So the needle is moving very, very fast on this story in Europe right now. Politicians are stuck in debates on how to handle it. And I'm slightly more optimistic today than I was just a few weeks back when it comes to the European consensus on this story. So I think the truth lies somewhere in between the consensus in the US and the consensus in Europe.
Yeah, even though that consensus is shifting. Why has the conversation... So you've been really active tweeting about the energy situation, and rightly so, I think, because it is one of the main issues for everyone, certainly for different reasons, but for Europe. Why has the conversation been so intense? I mean, I see you sort of duking it out, it's an American expression, like in battle, in these heated debate on Twitter. Why is that going on? What's happening around this energy conversation that's created, these extreme views or swings?
I mean, first of all, a couple of days ago, I was contacted by the Danish intelligence service, and they asked me whether they could investigate if I was the target of a Russian shitstorm on my Twitter profile. Quite interesting whether that's true or not. But it seems as if there is a narrative that Putin holds all the cards, at least on the right wing of the political spectrum in Europe, but also to a certain extent on the left wing, actually. So the extremists in both ends of the spectrum in Europe tend to think that Putin holds all the cards. I'm not necessarily sure that he does so. We can get back to that discussion, but it's quite clear that there are groups within the European society shooting at European politicians for bringing us into this mess. And I, by the way, agree with that narrative. I think we hold ourselves to blame to a large extent for this current crisis. But by the end of the day, the question is whether Putin holds all the cards or we do. And I think, again, the truth sort of lies in between those two poles, because both Europe and Russia are stuck in a big mess. It's not only Europe.
Well, that's so interesting, because I mean, I feel like I have been, feeling that those extremes, especially for those not sitting on the continent, the sort of worry going through when you see all the headlines. And it's not just, it's traditional media, it's on Twitter, it's kind of everywhere, that, oh my God, they're running out of fuel, they're going to be freezing, they're going to people without heat. I mean, it's really, maybe you could say it's the doom porn out there, but that it's a crisis that's going to cripple Europe, that there is no solution, that they're running out of time, like a ticking time bomb. I mean, it's been really worrying. Is it motivated by politics? Do you think this is sort of the type of, I know you don't know the answer to this, but it's sort of speculatively, or motivated by the same kind of, social media sort of bot that we saw take place with the U.S. election? That's a really interesting, that the intelligence reached out to you with that. It must be that they suspect that as well.
I mean, there is a truckload of Russian misinformation floating around on social media right now. I've tried to debunk quite a few of those myths surrounding that Russia holds all the cards in relation to this negotiation versus Europe. And I think that's one of the reasons. I think Russia is clearly meddling with the social media activity in the West in relation to this question. But let me just emphasize that I think it's fair that we discuss whether Europe will run out of energy or not, because currently we are basically in the hands of Mother Nature when it comes to this question.
Exactly, where we often find ourselves. So with that context now, that there's a lot of misinformation out there, there are a lot of maybe political motives all over the place for making this a really extreme conversation. Let's try to sort of dig beneath those headlines and figure out or give us your best sense of what's going on in terms of supply and demand and the sort of mechanics of how this market's working. So very broadly, first of all, where are we with supplies for Europe?
Well, they are not as bad as reported. I think that's sort of where we are right now. Russia basically closed off the Nord Stream 1 pipeline a few days back. So the flow from Russia to Germany is right about zero now. There are some indirect flows via China and some direct flows via the Netherlands, but the direct pipelines from Russia to Germany, they are now closed. And I guess that is sort of the base case for at least the foreseeable future, that Germany will not receive any flows from Russia at all. But we should remember that Germany has other suppliers than Russia. We've seen a rapid increase in the import of liquid natural gas from the US, from Qatar, from Norway, and even to a certain extent, a couple of African countries. And Europe is able to at least partly cope with the downturn in Russian gas flows via the inflow of liquid natural gas from the seaside. That's one thing. The second thing is that Norway is doing its best to sort of keep up with demand in Europe. So they are basically filling pipelines to an extent possible from Norway to Germany and elsewhere around the European continent. And we should also remember that Putin is still sending gas to the eastern parts of Europe via pipelines, and also to a certain extent to Turkey via the Turk Stream pipeline. So there is still gas flows. There are still gas flows from Russia to parts of Europe, but not directly to Germany. But interestingly, over the past 2 to 3 weeks, German injections into natural gas storages have been record high. And I repeat, record high. We've never seen injections into natural gas storages at this pace before in the German economy. That's quite interesting, given all of the flow reports that we see in the media, right? So the natural gas storage will be 100% filled by mid-October at the latest. And that allows a bit of time to plan, I think. The German storage sites, they contain roughly 2.5 to 3 months of natural gas. And we should remember that there is still a flow, even with Russia cutting off all of the supply to Germany. That flow is roughly around 60 to 65% of the usual total flow. So it's not that bad. And I mean, on my calculations, if we get like a neutral to mild winter in Europe, we will actually make it through just about with storages intact. So it's not that bad. But obviously, if we get a severe winter and a firm heating season, so to speak, then we'll run out of gas. That's kind of inevitable.
So this is what you're saying, that the real wild card here is Mother Nature and the forecast for the winter. Do we know, I mean, farmers' almanacs aren't perfect, but do we know what the expectation is?
Well, if we look at the 5-year average of the heating needed in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, if we just take that 5-year average, we will probably make it. So we need a worse winter than what we've seen in recent years. The usual winter is a lot milder than 10, 20 years ago in Europe as a consequence of climate change. So I think there is a decent chance that we will actually make it through. Whether we get a cold winter in 3-4 months from now, I should probably refrain from forecasting.
Then we really get suspicious that you have a crystal ball. So how much can conservation efforts contribute, or is it just nibbling around the edges? We've heard about the maybe changing some shifts, with companies. Are those things, do you think, going to be put into effect regardless, just in case the weather's colder? And do they really make a difference?
I think the target is 15% worth of reductions in the natural gas consumption over the winter season. And I think that's manageable without too large production halts. We all, by the way, already see production halts as a consequence of the price increase. So we probably don't even need to force them upon the corporate sector, right? They will do it voluntarily due to the price increase. So by the end of the day, I actually think that the economic activity will take care of this kind of itself, given that production halts are already sort of the name of the game in parts of the European industry as a consequence of high prices. It is essentially the market taking care of this via the price channel rather than politicians forcing production halts to happen. So if we look at the year-to-date statistics for Germany, as an example, the natural gas consumption is down more than 10% versus last year. So it's already happening, basically.
Yeah, that's true. And I want to get to the price action because this is so important. And there were some headlines this week that were, I think, so concerning. And I, want to see if we can kind of wade through some of that and make some sense of it. But so if you get through this winter, I guess the energy bulls, if we want to call them that, are those that are more worried about Europe's ability to deal with the situation will say, okay, if you get lucky and you get a mild winter, you get through this winter. But this is a multi-year problem. So you've gained yourself some time, but it's not enough. And so there's still this massive vulnerability.
I think it's fair to say that currently we're debating this winter, but I guess the issue is still there in a year from now. So I guess we will move between extremes when it comes to market activity in Europe over the coming 2 to 3 years, from one extreme to the other when it comes to the pricing of electricity and natural gas, because I could envisage a landslide in electricity and natural gas prices over the next 3 to 6 months. But I think we will see a rapid increase in the price of electricity and natural gas at the exact same time next year, because we don't have the time to solve the supply issue in 12 months. That's simply not a feasible scenario. But for now, I think the interventions made by European politicians will actually allow the market to calm down quite a bit.
Hi there, visionaries. If you want to get more of these kind of insights, join our community over at realvision.com. There you'll get unbiased insights and exclusive access to the very best, brightest and biggest names in finance. Be a part of our community of lifelong learners. See you there.